Hi, Jody Hardesty with Empowered Heart Connections. I'm going to talk about problem solving in general and how it can affect us whenever we are in relationships or whenever we are developing relationships. One of those, they're called cognitive biases, and all of us are guilty of them. We all kind of get conditioned to use these over time, and they reinforce themselves because they convince us that we're right to use them. So an example of one of those is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is whenever we are basically looking for information to validate our original opinion. So this can be problematic in a relationship if, for example, we are convinced that maybe all guys are cheaters, right? So whenever we are dating someone, we might look for information to support this belief. Again, not that we want to be unhappy or we want to be let down, but sometimes our need to be right supersedes our need to be happy. So we're looking for confirmation that this belief that we have that all men are cheaters is true, right? So say your partner may show up late for a date, or maybe they come home late from work, or maybe they missed your call, and your reasoning is clearly they're cheating, right? I mean, when you draw that conclusion, you're looking for information. So all of these little discrepancies that are happening are adding up in your mind when you're using confirmation bias to be conclusive evidence that you are indeed correct, and he is a cheater because he's avoiding my calls because he's talking to his girlfriend, or he's showing up late because he's out with his girlfriend, or he's home late from work because he's out with his girlfriend. So these are all, there's zero evidence, right, to support that belief, but we're finding and pulling from our imagination because we're really creative at trying to find a reason to justify this fear, right? This fear or this belief is that all men are cheaters. So how do I validate that belief? Well, every problem that I have in my relationship, I make about him being a cheater. And even though I have no evidence to support that, that is something that I am convincing myself of. And I'm really good at convincing myself and everyone else that we're all good at confirmation bias. So it's important to recognize when we're doing that okay, I'm confirming something, but do I really have any evidence that that is true, or are those just my thoughts going to Worryville? And do I need to live there? Do I need to have a conflict with my partner that may be non-existent because my imagination is potentially getting the best of me? All right. So confirmation bias can happen in all kinds of areas. Whatever we strongly believe, especially if we have an emotional attachment to that belief, we can endlessly be searching to find information to validate that belief, right? This happens in politics. We see all the time. You probably go to one news source or another if they are leaning in the same belief system, the same bias that you have. So it happens in many areas in our lives. But it's important to really recognize that it might be something that's keeping you stuck in relationships, and particularly with maybe not helping you with that kind of stinking thinking we've talked about before. Another one is the availability heuristics. The availability heuristics is when we are presented with information that's maybe predominantly presented more than it actually happens. So, for example, a plane crash. You very rarely hear about plane crashes, but when you do hear about plane crashes, it's pretty dramatic, it's pretty tragic, and especially with our media and social media, it's probably been blasted out at you on every social media network, on every media channel, and you're probably getting inundated with it. And this often creates a sense that the frequency of that event happening is much more likely than it actually is. So statistically, it's incredibly unlikely to have a plane crash. It's more likely to have a car crash. But a lot of people have a lot less fear of driving their cars than they do for having a flight on a plane. And again, this is the availability heuristics. This often happens in news. We feel like negative events are happening more frequently than they are because that's what draws people to the news is drama, trauma, tragic events. That's what people are watching on the news, and often what draws us even in social media. So believing that those negative events are happening much more frequently than they are can be really likely. This can also happen in your relationships, right? Your only information that you have of relationships is typically from the people around you and your own experience. So because that information is available to you and prevalent to you, you're likely to interpret that that is the most common scenario. So if we apply past traumatic events to our current relationships as being highly likely, then it's likely we might kind of anticipate that. It might affect the way we're interacting in a relationship. It might affect the way we're able to connect with someone. So recognizing what those biases are and really establishing what's happening for you and what that looks like for you. Another one of those is representative bias. And so say maybe we know we've a lot of us have a bad image in our minds when it comes to pit bulls, right? Because we've heard those horror stories about pit bulls on TV or the news or whatever, or maybe we know someone who's been bit by a pit bull. So that there's a representative bias. So there's a representation of that particular stereotype in our heads, and we kind of get stuck with believing that all pit bulls are like that. It's kind of like a stereotype or representative of that particular breed, when in fact the most dog bites are from smaller dogs, ironically, which makes sense, you're toting them around all the time. But these representative biases or these belief systems that we kind of get stuck in a belief system that's really not helping us or keeping us from viewing things as accurately as we could. And it's difficult to kind of unattach from those belief systems, but it is important to recognize that they are happening. It's also important to recognize that they happen to us within the world that we're living in, and they can affect our own mental health, particularly the availability heuristics. Whenever we are inundating ourselves with whatever social media or media out there, that we're getting inundated a lot of times with things that are promoting us to be fearful. And that's a lot of times what keeps us stuck in relationships is we're afraid we're going to get hurt. We're afraid that something bad is going to happen. We're afraid that we're not lovable. We're afraid we're not enough. Whatever that fear is for you may be getting reinforced by these cognitive biases. And once you recognize what those cognitive biases are, it's helpful to kind of reevaluate where that came from and assess, is this really true? And how do I know that that's really true? How much evidence do I have that that's true? And to recognize whenever your fear is running your life, that your fears are becoming the focus. And that's can be really damaging to your life and your relationships. I know I've struggled with anxiety in my own life, and a lot of that is from my own availability heuristics, my own stressors and fears that I've created in my mind. And it's helpful to assess, first of all, is this fear going to kill me? Am I in danger in this moment? And secondly, is it something I can do anything about in this moment? Is it helping me to have these fearful thoughts and to really move through them more quickly so that you don't stay stuck going back, looping through those confirmation biases, the availability bias, and all of those belief systems that might be keeping you from moving forward and really bringing in a relationship that can make you kind of let go of those fears and establish a connection with somebody that you can really find is fulfilling and rewarding and will break up all those belief systems that you've had stuck rattling around in your brain. Because the more we let go of these cognitive biases and these beliefs, these fears that are keeping us stuck, the more likely it is that we're going to have success in our future relationships and even just living a peaceful and happy life. Thank you for watching, and thank you for joining this journey with me. I hope this has been helpful.